The Bible warns us that the sluggard justifies his laziness, claiming that there's a danger around every corner, like a lion. That's Proverbs 22, verse 13. But the Bible also tells us in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11 through 13, that we are actively called to expose the deeds that are done in darkness, even those dark deeds that are done by unbelievers. Continuing on, discernment, therefore, in biblical terms, it's not primarily a supernatural spidey sense that tingles every time something, bad is about to happen, and it only is accessible to those especially spiritual Christians. No, in biblical terms, discernment is simply the ability to understand what the threats of our time are and to practically apply biblical principles to them. So, today's episode is this: 3 tools for judging conspiracies. 3 tools for judging conspiracies. And before we begin this conversation, the first thing that I think is in order is simply to introduce the crew. So,
hey, Joel, really glad to be here. Really excited for this. My name is Michael Belch. I'm a member at Joel's church, and I teach for an online classical school, Logos Online School. And, a fellow red pillar and believer in conspiracy theories.
Right. Amen. Except the only difference is we're trying to follow that red pill with a Christ pill and
absolutely.
not, the black pill and disparage.
You know what we need? We need the pill that's actually the do something about it pill.
The do something.
Yeah,
Amen.
I don't know what color that is,
Yep.
but we need that color of pill.
Amen.
That's great.
Here we go.
Yep. So my name is Wesley Todd, Christian. I'm also a husband, father to 2 children. One of them just born last month. So God's really blessed our family. Work a regular corporate job, 9 to 5 in health research. Excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. So let's go ahead and start the conversation. 3 tools for judging conspiracies. And like Michael said, I think the first thing that we should admit is, at least over these past few years, the difference between a conspiracy and the truth is approximately 3 to 6 months.
Yep.
So we are not, going to sit here and lecture you from an ivory tower of sophistication saying, I can't believe you blue-collar, flyover country Neanderthals believe in conspiracies. No, we believe in a lot of conspiracies because it turns out there are wicked people in the world, and sometimes wicked people actually organize together in darkness to accomplish wicked things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
No, I agree with that. And I think what is particularly difficult is admitting that you live in a time where things are bad enough that some of these conspiracies might be true. And I know for myself, when I was thinking about BLM stuff and was this orchestrated behind the scenes, COVID stuff, is this orchestrated behind the scenes? The biggest thing for me was getting to the point where I had to admit the society and nation that I love has descended to the point where lying is not just expected, it's incentivized. Right? And being dishonest and hiding and power plays of this sort is something that can yield a lot of power, a lot of money, a lot of influence. And because of that, it's more likely than not that these sort of conspiracies and plots are going on.
Yep.
And there's been so much propaganda too. So with the amount of information, the speed that it travels with, if you work a white collar job, you're getting bombarded with propaganda. Diversity is our strength. Love is love. Just given to you as like, this is fact, accept it. Why would you even think to question it? Are you some backwoods hillbilly? And so you are bombarded with any type of social media daily, on a daily basis with things that you should believe to much greater degree than previous generations had to deal with. They didn't have to deal with that level of information control and bombardment.
Right. Yep. You're constantly the social media, and then of course the Longhouse department, HR, with all the school marms that are constantly telling you to be moral, to be moral, to be moral, and to be moral is whatever the reigning dogma of that moment is.
Indeed.
And diversity, is a big one. And with diversity, I preached on this even just this last Sunday, but diversity is not our strength, especially when it comes to diversity of lies or polytheism or plural. Like that's the whole idea, principled pluralism. Well, wait a second. If there is a transcendent truth that reigns above all the other, like God be true, though every man were a liar, right? So if the word of God is true and there is a transcendent, universally absolute truth standard, then principled pluralism just means we're going to have this true transcendent standard, and we're going to have a bunch of other things that are other than true. You might call them deceptions. And we're going to call that a strength? No, that's just called compromise. I would much rather have a monolithic organization or society that all ascends to one truth, provided that that one truth is in fact true. The idea that we all have compromising convictions and beliefs and different standards and weights and measurements for what's even a virtue or what's a vice, this is not our strength. Diversity is our strength was just rhetoric that has been used by some of our overlords in order to pollute our nation. And I'm not even speaking about ethnicity,
Right.
or even immigration in a literal sense, but the immigration of ideas. I'm talking about Marxism. I'm talking about false doctrine coming into the church. I'm talking about BLM. I'm talking, and immigration. Because let's be honest, it's a full-blown invasion.
You cannot bring people in without bringing their ideas.
Right.
And I remember hearing a podcast recently. We live in Texas, and the guy was saying that 2023 was the most favorable year for pro-Muslim policies in Texas history.
Wow.
And it's not that we want to hate Muslims, but the Muslim worldview and the Christian worldview are diametrically opposed.
Yes.
And it seems like, to your point, there is a concerted effort to take many different steps that all combine to water down solid Christian Western values and worldview. And when that collapses, then anything can go.
Right.
Then anything can go.
Right.
And even basic competency, too. That's where it almost can feel like a conspiracy, because it's actually the things we share that make us most able to pursue a harmonious life. When you share language, when you share a place, when you share values, when you share a calendar, you share religion, those actually sharing those things is what enables distinct people groups to actually pursue what's good and right. And so you see, almost feels concerted, almost feels deliberate to say, no. All of these different groups, that's what makes us strong. No, it's not you guys speaking the same language, pursuing a shared goal in physics or mathematics, this, that, or the other. It's being diverse in every dimension.
Yeah, and that's the opposite. It's funny because that's the opposite of Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel. Because God, it's not just man. They don't just say, look, we can do whatever we want so long as we stay united. In the same way that like in Genesis 1 and 2, Adam formed before Eve. He's the only human being on the planet. Adam doesn't notice his aloneness, but God takes note of it. And God says it's not good for the man to be alone. Likewise, in a similar fashion, in Genesis 11, it's not the people congregated together who are building this tower to ascend to the heavens that take note of themselves and say, if we stay together, if we, continue to unite, nothing is impossible for us. But God actually says, let us go down and confuse our languages, for if they remain united, nothing will be. So God even takes note of the power of unity among his image-bearing creatures. And just for the record, I don't know, I think the two of you both agree with this. We've had some offline discussions, our men's night with the church and stuff like that. But I'm of the persuasion that Babel was not a curse. I view Babel.
Not.
Okay, so I view Babel as like the original dominion mandate given in the garden pre-sin. So in a prelapsarian world, is to be fruitful and multiply, and that the natural implication of that is that Adam and Eve would not congregate in the garden because they would multiply so fruitfully, so successfully, that they would have to spread out over the face of the earth with image bearers of the living God, aka worshipers, because this is a pre-fallen world. So they would be their hearts bent towards God, bent towards heaven, and they would also expand not only their posterity, their descendants, but also Adam in working and keeping the garden, both defending it in the keeping aspect, but working it. That working would include expansion and increase, so they would cover the whole earth with a garden city of the Lord, this garden paradise, and fill it with image-bearing worshipers of the triune God. And that was, so my point is the dominion mandate, I think it necessarily, I think you could say it's a necessary inference. If you multiply successfully, you can't all live on 1 square mile with 1 billion people. So what were they going to do? They were geographically going to spread out. And in the spreading out, Stephen Wolfe even talks about some of these things, and I think he's right. In spreading out, when they spread out really far, like different continents, eventually it may be 100 years before we go back and visit great-great-great-great-great-granddad Adam.
Right.
And so we've been over here for, 150 years and haven't gone back to the mainland in quite a while, haven't visited. And, we didn't even really notice, but there's some different dialects starting to emerge and some different cultures.
We dress differently.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Like we have a lot of Germans in our area of Texas where we live that all came over, as refugees, escaping World War I and World War II. And so now it's like on the third and fourth generation. And it's funny because we have a family in our church that actually are from Germany, but like they
first
moved
generation.
here. Exactly. They moved
Right.
here like a year ago. And so they're like full-bred Germans. And they even are able to notice that if they go up to Fredericksburg, for instance, which is totally a German town, if they talk to hear anyone talking in German in that town, these fourth generation descendants, they're like, you don't speak German the way we do. It's a different dialect. And even some of the words we just have different words. And so my point is, you would have had different nations. You would have had different nations, different groups, different languages, different cultures, probably different flavors of food, all those kinds of things, but all Christian oriented, right? Because we're not saying all cultures are equal. Some cultures are better than others. Cultures that say, hey, you should show up on time are better than cultures that show up 3 hours late. That's just a fact. That's not racism. That's just a fact. That has to do with respecting people. It comes from love for neighbor. It comes from the Christian worldview. But you could have cultures, I think hypothetically, we could presuppose equal cultures morally that still have distinction. Equal doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the same. They could be equally committed to the Christian worldview, the triune God, but have different flavors in their food.
I'll do you one better, Joel. I believe that Babel was necessary. That the development of language was necessary. I teach language. That's my day job. And as I've looked at Babel and Pentecost, and then the scene of those gathered around the throne, where it says men from every tribe, tongue, and nation. And as I've studied a variety of languages, and I've realized there are certain concepts that one language communicates better than another language. For instance, Russian does not have a direct object. So you cannot directly translate when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So it's a little bit more difficult in Russian to communicate the exclusivity of Christ. However, you look at other languages are going to be able to communicate something unique about God that a different language could not. And I think when we gather around that throne, the myriad of languages, human languages that are spoken, will serve to illustrate facts about God that will even marvel other humans who spoke other languages and hold up that jewel of God's holiness in a way that a single language would not have been able to do.
I completely agree. And it's funny, though, that you say that, because I just saw on Twitter yesterday someone who I don't even remember his name. But if I did, his name is not of consequence. I'm not trying to throw him under the bus. But he was arguing with a Christian nationalist who was making kind of the similar point that we're making now, that Babel was not a judgment. It was a judgment, but it was not a curse. It was actually discipline.
Yeah.
It was God getting man back on track, right? So in the garden, the dominion mandate, be fruitful, multiply, that would have included necessarily expansion over the whole face of the earth, and in expanding over the dialects, languages, cultures, everything we've just established. Well, man was disobeying God. That's what they were doing. So they were uniting, and unity is good. But the problem is they literally say, let us unite here, build this tower, not only to ascend to the heavens, to be as God, but to make a name for ourselves, so for our own glory rather than the glory of God, and so that we will not be scattered over the face of the earth. So we're doing this so that we won't have to obey. We won't have to do the very thing that God actually has called us to do. So when God comes and confuses their languages, which causes them to disperse, it's actually not a curse. It's not punitive as much as it is disciplinary. It's actually a mercy. It is a judgment. It is a punishment of sorts, but not punitive as much as it is like the rod for a child, disciplinary, because it's actually getting it's being used as a catalyst, and that's the mercy component, because their sin should have cost them centuries. But in God's mercy, he throws in this supernatural catalyst to get them back on the obedience track much more quickly than they otherwise would. And so back to the Twitter thing, this, somebody was making essentially that point, and this guy on Twitter was saying, a Christian guy, Reformed Baptist guy, a pastor, but he was saying, no, in heaven, we'll all speak the same language.
I've heard that.
And the guy countered and said, which one? Which one's the best? Like, are we all speaking Hebrew? Is it Latin? Is it English? Is it Spanish?
Yep.
Who wins out? Who's superior? Whose language was the most moral? And basically, asking that, and I don't think we will all speak the same language. I think every tongue. Now, I think God will probably throw us a bone and we'll be able to understand other people's language, whether that's supernatural or just with sin and sin being removed and glorified bodies, glorified minds. I'll be able to pick up fluent Spanish, in a couple weeks, instead of years. But one way or the other, I think I'll be able to understand everybody. Either immediately, supernaturally, or relatively soon with a glorified mind. But I don't think I'm going to understand everybody because God just gives us one language. Right. I think the whole idea is that there are other tribes, other tongues, other cultures, and other skin pigment. There will be different shades, different colors. And that's okay. That's great. That's better than okay. It's good.
It's wonderful.
And getting to conspiracy theories, that's some of the lie of globalism. So we're going to subsume all these different cultures and these particularities that are good and right, and they demonstrate the glory of God, his power in making humanity. We're going to subsume them all into a giant consumerist, androgynous glob. Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting because it doesn't have to necessarily be a cabal of 8 of the most powerful people that have just unilateral, I say goes no matter if I'm in Switzerland, like a certain economic forum, they could say something and it happens in Texas. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily need to be, but when there are tons of different groups and they hate God, they can come together and say, globalism, that sounds like a pretty good idea. We can take everything, we can rent it out on a permanent basis. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy to not own anything. Right. And the image of God that, like George Orwell, he talks about it in 1984. He says, imagine a boot on the face of mankind forever and ever. That's propaganda. That's globalism. That's the continually rewriting of history. And that's what globalism is. A boot on the face of man is saying, let's subsume and homogenize all of these different things that God made for the purpose of money. And again, are people literally coming together and scheming, twiddling their fingers in the back?
Yeah,
maybe.
I think probably.
Yeah. Are they very good at it? But I don't think so.
But is that a necessary requirement? I think that's your point. So are there 8 guys in a room doing this? I actually lean towards yes. However, and we'll get to that, but your question, I think, is larger than that. You're saying, but does sin require a cabal? And the answer is no. Not the reality is because Jesus said he did not entrust himself to men, for he knew what was in the hearts of men. And I think of it's either 1st or 2nd Peter that says sin. It uses this phrase, sin which is common to man. The reality is that people are unique, tribes and tongues and language are unique, and yet in one sense people are very similar. And one of those ways in which we are similar is when it comes to sin. Greed is a pretty universal temptation, right?
Yeah.
Power, power is not inherently wicked in and of itself, but abuse of power for self-gain, domination, domineering spirit, lust would be another one. Like these kind of sins, especially if you're a pastor and you do pastoral counseling, then there comes a certain point where nothing really surprises you anymore. It's like, somebody comes and it's like, okay, it's either marriage problems, or it's lust, or it's greed, or it's slothfulness, or it's one of these. It's nobody's that unique of a snowflake. No one else is like me when it comes to the topic of sin. And so, all that being said, if you have a system like globalism that would at least appear to satisfy the need for power and greed. Just taking two sins, power again, not a sin, but the abuse of power and greed, and it would satisfy. It's a system that would satisfy that for not and that's why in some sense I lean away from the 8 guys in a room, because that actually would work. Globalism would work out for a lot more than just 8 guys. which is part of the reason why we've been successfully prodded along in that direction, because there actually is an incentive for enough people, not just 8 people, but a lot of people, to where everybody, without having to have some global summit in Switzerland, they can all instinctively just know, yeah, I want that. Oh, shipping more jobs overseas? Yep, I'm for that.
Yep.
Oh, yep. More of this, less trade tariffs, less, whatever. Oh, yeah, I'm for that.
It's viable. I'm in. This serves me. It doesn't have to be.
It serves me. It serves me. Like Jeff Bezos is an example in terms of not necessarily he's a part of the Illuminati or anything like that, although who knows. But my point is, it's been said Jeff Bezos earned his first billion, but was handed his second. And of course that's it's a generalization. So there you can poke some holes in that. But the sense is like there is a real sense in which the dude was collecting things in his garage and shipping them. In the good old days, the early days, and did work hard, right? And maybe he could have been more fair with this or whatever, but he did work. But when COVID happened, that second billion, it doubled Amazon's footprint.
Yeah.
And why? Because COVID and the regulations, the levers that were pulled by politicians during that time, shut down every brick and mortar mom and pop in-person store.
Yep.
To where now. Unless you were already there, unless you had already arrived at the capital and a system and the organization and the viability to just ship everything from a warehouse without having to have interaction with people, where you can have a guy drive a truck, and wear gloves and drop off a box. Unless you were already there and Amazon was already there, then you could not compete. And so Amazon, for the last 3 years until very recently, had no competition. And so they earned their first billion. And were handed the next. And so my point is, if you're Jeff Bezos and they're talking about, it's 2020, they're talking about COVID regulations, are you for them or against them?
Right.
Now, you might be for them because, and everything in your rhetoric, publicly, you're saying, well, it's because of physical safety and I don't want grandma to die and blah, blah, blah. But do you have at least the potential of an ulterior motive? Yeah.
Pfizer stood to get so many billions. Like whatever drug manufacturer made it to the point where they had an approved COVID vaccine, billions and billions of dollars, years worth of operating expenses. So even that factor alone, not attributing any malice, anything I don't know, even right there, you don't have incentive, or you have the incentive to be like, yeah, it's safe. Let's get this trial done. Yep. Oh, they died, but maybe we could attribute it to that. Right there, just on money alone, greed in the heart of someone, just seeing because the governments were going to pay for it. Governments all over the world were lined up, ready to give and ship cash to these people.
Yep.
So there didn't have to be a group talking about, let's get something lethal. They didn't have to. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Greed alone explains things like that.
Right. It explains it for the companies. And then to go one step further, it also explains it in terms of legislation for the politicians if there happen to be several politicians that are invested in Pfizer. Personally.
Speaking fees,
right.
consultancy fees.
I see. So all that being said, and we got to cut to a commercial real quick, but all that being said, that gets us into our 3 tools for judging conspiracies. Is one of the questions you should ask when you're considering a conspiracy is there enough people in the world with sin, as Peter says, which is common to man, that would stand to gain in their fleshly, desires if this thing panned out?
Right.
And if the answer to that is yes, there's a ton of people with this common sin that's common to man that if this thing were true, it would fulfill their fleshly desires, not just for 8 people, but for a lot of people. Or maybe it is 8 people, and in that case, those 8 people must be very powerful people. And if you can answer that question, yes, then I think that is a conspiracy that might be worth some time exploring because it really does stand a chance of being true. So we'll come right back, but let's go and cut to a quick commercial.
The danger of centralized power is often represented by the word king. As Americans, we hate the word king. Civilian ownership of body armor is about helping people to have increased power to resist tyrants and criminals. And so, Armored Republic is about helping you to preserve your God-given rights to the honor of the Lord Jesus Christ because He is the King of Kings, and He governs kings and He will judge them. This is Armored Republic, and in a republic, there is no king but Christ. We are free craftsmen, and we are honored to be your armorsmith of choice.
Finally, a coffee company that doesn't hate you and your beliefs. Today's sponsor, Squirrely Joe's Coffee, is a thoroughly Christian company that ships seriously good coffee straight to your front door. Owned and operated by Joe Morris and his family out of Olney, Illinois. They believe that Christians should be building a thoroughly Christian economy by doing business with other like-minded Christians. Just go to squirrelyjoes.com and use promo code RRM for 20% off your purchase. Squirrely Joe's Coffee, share coffee, serve humbly, live faithfully. All right, we are back. So let me just take a moment before we hop back into our discussion about judging conspiracies rightly from the Word of God. I want to give you guys a little bit of just the vision for this show. So the idea is that we're going to be live streaming, doing this show every single week. So our flagship show that we've called Theology Applied, where I interview somebody and they're piping in remotely, guys like Doug Wilson or whoever, Brian Sauvé, that's going to continue, but it's going to move from Tuesday, which is historically where we've had it, to being on Mondays. So we're going to have 3 shows a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, all at 4 p.m. Central Time. So Monday will be Theology Applied, the interview that I do remotely with someone. Every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Central Time, is Theology Applied, the live stream. That's what we're doing right now. And it's going to be me and Wesley Todd and Michael Belch every single week, Lord willing, at 4 p.m. Central Time. And part of the reason we're doing this, the strength of the live stream is, we've got the guys not just piped in remotely, but in person, in the studio. It allows for a more natural conversation, but it also, by being a live stream, it allows for us to hit some general topics. Today would be an example of that, how to judge a conspiracy, right? We could do that this week or next week or next week or next week, and that's kind of evergreen. It's always going to be relevant. But the idea for the Wednesday show is that at least, part of the time, probably about half the time would be our goal. We're going to, we might have something on deck, notes, and plotted out an episode that's an evergreen type thing. But we're going to drop it last minute because, boom, something that's relevant for Christians just hit the news the day before. And because we have a live stream, we can address it in a quick fashion. Whereas Theology Applied, the interview, which now will be on Mondays, and the Friday show, which is going to be called the Friday Special, Theology Applied, the Special, those are pre-recorded, most of those episodes. And so the Wednesday opportunity with this live stream, 4 p.m. Central Time, it gives us the opportunity to actually address things that might have happened just 24 hours before. So we will address some news cycles, but at the same time, we're not going to sit here and pretend to be the Daily Wire or something that we're not, and something that, in that case, we don't necessarily want to be. But we're going to do what we feel that we can speak to. So there may be a huge news story that we don't address because somebody else, Tucker Carlson, can address it better than we can. But there may be something else that drops. It's like no. This. We've got something to say about. The Bible has something very clearly, and Christians need to know what's up. So, all right. So all that being said, back to the conversation. Okay. 3 tools for judging conspiracies.
So let's jump into, we've kind of alluded to it already, but the first tool that we are recommending if you want to discern and evaluate conspiracies, and that is, I think I said, don't be an ostrich, don't put your head in the sand. Mm-hmm. Don't be a bumblebee just jumping around from flower to flower. And,
conspiracy to conspiracy.
Have discernment, right? Mm-hmm. Have discernment. And I guess before we talk about discernment, I really want to stress a growing conviction that I have that we as Christians have an obligation to actually take our heads out of the sand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The times that we live in are times where virtue is not praised. And so even before, with the remnants of Christendom, we had men who perhaps valued honor and truthfulness and honesty, and that is increasingly not the case. And so if Christians are not going to bring the truth to bear on society, no one else is at this point. Very few people are. And so as I thought about the bumblebee and the ostrich, I had a special desire to say we need to bring the truth. It is appropriate and Christian and part of our mission of the Great Commission to teach our nations, right? And part of that means teaching them what is true, teaching them how to discern truth, teaching them how to reject falsehood. And this really is part of Christian duty, not to put a tinfoil hat on, not to be someone who is engaged in, I guess, in intentionally inflammatory conspiracies, but some of the things that are going on are inflammatory, are serious, and are the sort of thing that needs to be talked about.
It needs to be exposed.
Yep.
Yeah, Christians actually have a biblical obligation. It's a command to not take part in the deeds done in darkness, but rather expose them. So we actually have a biblical command to expose conspiracies, but we also have a biblical command not to hole up in our home and say there's a lion in the streets.
Correct.
That's not what the fearful person does. That's what the lazy person does, and he uses fear and conspiracies as his excuse to actually, justify the fact that, really what's going on is he doesn't want to go out in the world and do his job. Like there may be a man who is failing his obligations as husband and father, leading his family in family worship and being a faithful member in his local church because he's online looking at all these conspiracies, and he may use that verbose language and saying, well, but there's a lion in the streets and I've got to expose the lion and blah blah blah. Like it's like, well, yeah, but 17 of those lions out of the 18 are actually not real, and exposing deeds done in darkness does not trump our other moral obligation, which is even higher, which is to love our families and provide for our families, protect our families. You wanted to say something, I think?
Oh, it's just that's Paul in 2 Corinthians when he intros his letter. He's like, we commended ourselves to you as men of sincerity. We weren't peddlers of God's word.
That's good.
We didn't come to you with flash and with pomp. We tried to come to you with sincerity, bringing the word of God. And I'm certain he made sure to insulate himself, to not be bringing, sensational claims back from Jerusalem. He said, no, we commended to you with honor. And that's a good example.
Yeah, really good. Michael, could you read you wrote down like some questions in preparation for this episode. So this is still on principle number 1. So if you're keeping count, let me just say all 3 of them real quick, but we'll finish on 1, then we'll move to 2 and 3. But all 3 of them, just so you know, principle number 1, do not be gullible and do not be oblivious, but have discernment. Principle number 2, focus on conspiracies that affect you and your family. That's so helpful. Yep. Focus on things that actually affect you at home. And then principle number 3, learn to think. Logic, reason, right? It's almost like number 3 is like if the old illustration that's used a lot of, if you know how to detect a real dollar, then you can find the counterfeits. So again, principle number 1, do not be gullible, do not be oblivious, have discernment. So the first principle, don't be naive, don't be gullible. Second principle, focus on conspiracies that affect you and your family, conspiracies that hit close to home. Third principle, learn to think, learn logic and reason. So all that being said, still back with the first principle about not being naive and gullible, you wrote down some questions. You said, here are some helpful questions that can help Christians evaluate what they are being told, whether or not this should fall into the fake conspiracy box or no, something evil's really going on.
Right. And one of the big aha moments for me, and actually, Joel, you said this a while ago, is that it's okay and even good to use, as it were, common sense to root things out, right? And so these questions are not, you're not going to find necessarily a Bible verse for them, but they are common sense and knowing the nature of man, principles that will help us evaluate whether there's something to this conspiracy theory. So the first one is what motives might be involved, and we kind of talked about this with Amazon or Pfizer. Are there motives that could lead someone or a group of people to take advantage of the situation?
Which doesn't guarantee that there's something nefarious happening, but it says the likelihood is higher.
Yep. The second one is what larger pattern of events is going on. Does the emergence of, or would Amazon be incentivized to have fewer retailers? Is there an election going on? Is there a resurgence of conservatism globally? Do we need to shut that down? Is there a bigger pattern going on that this fits into? And number...
So, yep.
Number three, who is the one spreading the particular narrative? Who is the one spreading the particular narrative?
Read that. For instance,
During COVID, Amazon supported lockdowns. Pfizer pushed vaccines. Did they stand to gain from those narratives?
Yep,
This was not just some guy in his basement, saying, "Oh, there's this virus." There were powerful players who stood to gain and were in some ways interconnected.
Right. So with whatever the latest, big news is, who's pushing it?
Yep.
What do they stand to gain if what they're pushing actually turns out to be true?
Yep.
What would they stand to gain? So if it's like, hey, the bubonic plague is happening and everyone in the world is going to die unless you get the vaccine. Well, who's saying that? Oh, the vaccine company?
Right.
And all the politicians that are invested in that vaccine and their stock? Okay, well, that, again, doesn't necessitate that it's a lie, but it should, that should ding our radar a little bit. And then what's the larger pattern? Well, it's, is it 2020 and it happens to be an election year with the most contentious president ever, at least in the last, 50 years.
The red hot economy that a lot of
people
progressives wanted to see derailed.
Yeah.
Right, because that economy was going to be the horse that he was going to ride into a second term. Like, oh, okay, so that should cause you to stop and think a lot, that should cause you to.
Now, after I wrote this, actually, Wes and I were talking, and we came up with the fourth one that was so good that I wanted to share it. So I'm going to read it, but I want you to expand on it, if you would. So the fourth way to evaluate, to have discernment in our time in particular, is who or what is being mocked or laughed at. Because we live in a time, when righteousness prevails, wickedness will be mocked and laughed at.
Right.
But when wickedness and unrighteousness prevail, then evil men will laugh at and will mock and will try and get you to have a feeling of revulsion for what is good and right. And so we feel like in this time that we live in, you need to look at what is being mocked, who is asking you to mock it, and where do they stand on the morality spectrum. And I think that you had some really good insights on that.
Yeah, so a great example would be late night shows. So Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, they're very carefully, this isn't my insight, this is someone else's, but they're very carefully programmed to give you a little snippet of facts, so 10, 20 seconds of information, an overview on the topic, and then it's some type of punchline. So if you have John Oliver talking about homeschooling, gives like an example, like a family doing a quirky, reciting the alphabet, and then he pulls up their example of the guy that they would hate. They're coastal elites. This is the Midwest guy who pulled his children out of school because he's like, I don't like the instruction coming from teachers on sensitive topics that aren't appropriate for children, and just laughed at him. And it repeats over and over and over again, to the point that you are being programmed, you are being instructed, it's being demonstrated, you should laugh at these people. Can you believe there are idiots out there not getting the vaccine? Go have your horse paced and die again and again and again. And so when you see like these people are being laughed at, you're being told by pundits, you're being told by news, mock these people, laugh at them, hold them with derision. Exactly. We live in a time that upholds wickedness and pushes down righteousness. So is what I'm hearing an actual mockery that should be coming towards wickedness, or are they actually making fun of the righteous? Or at the very least, I was going to say to point two, it's a lot easier to not jump in at first than to jump in and get yourself out. If you got COVID wrong and maybe shut down whatever it would be, your business or what have you, repentance is the way out. And repentance is painful. God would rather obedience rather than sacrifice. Now we can repent, we can get out of it, but it is a lot easier to just pause. Let's take a second, hang on, than to jump in, to want to be popular, to want to go on the march for BLM. And then later on, the videos are coming out and you've got to do the hard work of swallowing your pride and repenting of it.
Right. No, that's really good. So what's being mocked? Who's doing the mocking? Who's being mocked? But then with that, I think considering like degrees, so it's like because there's always going to be a late night show. Comedy there's always going to be that in any society, any culture. There's going to be some kind of entertainment, comedic, output, and so somebody's going to fulfill that role. But I think the question to consider is, are they making fun of the same thing in the same group again and again and again? Are the jokes even good? Or is this like a comedic guy who's literally not even making a joke? Like the blinking lights, with his live audience are saying, laugh or we'll shoot you in the head. Laugh, dance, monkey,
This
dance.
is funny.
Like, this is funny, you will laugh. Like that's John Oliver. Like John Oliver hasn't made a joke in 20 years. Like that dude's not funny. And so if it's like every single episode, for 3 weeks straight, the audience is, you can't see them, but there's, guys, John Oliver's goons pointing guns at their heads, forcing them to laugh because it's not even funny, but it's like, okay, there might be something here. You know what I mean? So I think it's like, who's making fun, who's doing the mocking, who's being mocked, but also how desperate, that's what I'm getting at is how desperate is this group and saying we've got to, because it's one thing if you just do a one-off joke. Right, but it's another if Saturday Night Live does a sketch and then another sketch and then another sketch, because then you might say either this is comedic gold. There's only really again, so getting them back to motives. This is either comedic gold or there's an agenda.
Yep. And when the comedy that's air quotes is aligning with the other three that we said, is it aligning with the seeming motives and narrative and things like that coming from government and big tech and all of these things? Now, all of a sudden, you start to see that the mockery is actually not so much to, the case has kind of been won by that point. It is to teach us how to treat those who disagree.
Right. Well, and that's what's so hard, I think, about conspiracies is conspiracies are, in our day and age, are going to be primarily pushed by media. It's going to be Hollywood. It's going to be actors. It's going to be shows. It's going to be talk hosts. It's going to be, so it's going to be people in media. And one, in asking that question of like, is it the possibility of a serious ulterior motive? Well, one serious ulterior motive for media to push a conspiracy, that the conspiracy having something to do with danger, or fear or threat or what. Well, one constant ulterior motive that they have is if more people stay home, they watch more stuff.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, what did people do during COVID? You think that, like, how did that work out
They
for
order
Netflix?
from Amazon and
you
You
watch
order
it,
Amazon
stream.
and you watch TV. Like, and so, like, whereas if everything's fine, if there is no line in the street, as Proverbs, talks about, if there is no line in the street, where people go? In the
Out
street.
in the street.
to work.
Right. Yeah. They go to work. They go on, maybe they go on a cruise or a vacation. They do something besides just watching television. So the media, which is one of the chief groups responsible for pushing conspiracies, always has an underlining motive in pushing conspiracies that threaten people's safety, because if people's safety is threatened, they stay at home, and at home they consume media.
Yep.
So that, like, I think that's a constant thing that we're battling, that there's always a sense. So it always could be true, on the motive basis. All right. So we should move on to principle number 2.
Number 2, focus on conspiracies that affect you and your family, and really specifically that affect the spheres of responsibility and duty that God has given to you. I don't mean just, you and your 2 kids at home, you and your wife and your 2 kids at home, although that's a big part of it, but also, you're called, if you're a man and you're out in the workplace, you're called to work. So if there's a conspiracy threatening to shut that down, or your neighbor, your literal neighbor, right? So the conspiracies that affect your ability and your family's ability to carry out the duties that God has given to you need to be investigated first, because those we have to be honest. Like, when churches closed for more than a little while, that was sinful.
Yeah.
That conspiracy tricked otherwise up to that point godly men and pastors and elders and deacons,
As far as we knew.
and they bought into it, and that caused them and their congregations to sin. Right? And so the conspiracies that threaten to pull you from your duty of building God's kingdom, and I don't mean just in a spiritual sense, but of carrying out your duty towards God, need to be investigated before who shot JFK.
Right. That's great. And that's a great example. Like, there are a million different conspiracies. You can get totally lost, in YouTube or Reddit or whatever, I don't know, whatever the cool kids are looking at today, totally lost and waste your life. You can waste your whole life, looking into the Illuminati but the question is, like, what's affected, so with COVID and shutting down churches, it's like, well, my wife and kids can't go to church today. Okay, well, that's one to get to the bottom of. BLM, I think, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. I think that's worth looking at. If you work for a big company and you're trying to provide for your family and leave generational wealth, right? A wise man or a good man, Proverbs says, leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Yes, that's a spiritual inheritance. It can be nothing less, but I believe it is more. And so you're seeking to do that, and you're getting constantly passed up at work. And you'd start to notice, you can't help but notice that the last 10 guys that have been promoted instead of you all happen to not be white or not male or not heterosexual. Well, that actually does affect you. That actually, and so to be involved with that particular conspiracy of the DEI, woke agenda, that actually, that's not just losing yourself in an obsessive capacity about something that's, that's random, or irrelevant. No, that actually is affecting you. It's affecting your neighbor, and it's sure as heck going to affect your kids. If you got little white kids, those little white kids, I mean, I've got white kids, and they're not going to stand a chance if the world keeps heading the direction that it's going. Right. So I'm encouraged when Gay, the professor, which is just perfect. I love that her name's Gay. But I feel like with Andrew Issachar, I wanted the fake and gay of trash world. It's like now you could just call it Gay because Gay, the actual person, this former head of Harvard, turns out is also fake and plagiarized. So fake and gay is really just gay. It's personified in a person. It now has a picture. Praise God. So it makes things easy. But the point is that when she was dethroned by Rufo and all these, I'm grateful for that because it's not just a random who shot JFK. It's that is a sign of truth winning the day. That's a sign of advancement and productivity that says my kids might actually stand a chance at getting into school. My kids might actually be able to get hired. That we might go back to merit.
Merit.
Yep. And merit is what Christians want, because Christians, if they're faithful Christians, merit is our friend because we're not afraid of work. I want merit because I plan to work hard at shaping my children like arrows, to be sharp, to be straight. And so merit is the friend of my children. Sinful partiality is not the friend of my children.
Not virtuous. There's a strain, too, of evangelicalism. There's an influence of pietism in it, but it's very functionally Gnostic. So when we think about conspiracies that affect the body and the health, there's going to be a huge amount of putting your head in the sand. Just to give an example, fluoride is generally added to the water supply, the FDA and the CDC. They would say 0.7 milligrams is a safe amount. It's supposedly to prevent cavities. Well, fluoride is a neurotoxin. The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, is this is actually neurotoxic. Now, you can get a filter for your home. You can get a filter for your faucet.
Look up if your city. In your home.
I filter it at the garage. I filter it at the sink. Run the cup through a sieve. No. But if I was to tell you that and say, hey, this should be something to consider. You don't have a well. You're on city water. It somehow comes up. And you were to say, I don't care. That's dereliction. If you're a father or even a mother, to say, this could be affecting my kids. This could be a problem. And I don't even care enough to look into it. That's not even saying you have to believe this, you have to take action. But hey, this could be going on. And you say, we got to care about holiness, brother. We've seen that a lot recently of no, men shouldn't be strong or women shouldn't pursue beauty. We should just pursue godliness and holiness.
Don't dress well. Don't get guns. Don't work out. Don't
Right.
Why? Because
give all your money away.
Right. Because your future is, your treasure is in heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But exactly. I also, I treasure Christ most of all. But that doesn't mean that I treasure nothing else. I treasure my wife also. I treasure my kids also. They have to live here for a while. I have to live here, but my children, Lord willing, will live here even longer than me. I remember, when I'll say it like this. Did you ever meet that guy, who was kind of like a rough and tumble dude who had tattooed, moderation is for cowards, that kind of. Right. Well, that's sounds really good. And I had a season of life, years ago where I thought, hey, that makes sense. And I get that. And, but then, one Bible verse, and there's several, but one that just kind of breaks that notion is physical training is of some value.
Yep.
Right. And so what I think the pietist does is they say that personal practices of piety are of infinite value, eternal value, and they are.
Yep.
But then they say, and by consequence, everything else is of no value. But the Apostle Paul doesn't speak in those terms. He doesn't say that worldly things are of no value, but heavenly things are of ultimate value. In fact, the word worldliness, which is used in a negative sense, is a total different way than many of the Christian nationalists or post-millennial guys would be using the term today. When we say worldly, we're not talking about the boastful pride of life, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes. That's the way 1 John is speaking of worldliness. When we say that we love the world, well, there's another guy who loved the world, John 3:16, for God so loved the world. And yes, that means people. But it also means the cosmos, his creation, which he said is good. And so we're saying, no, we care about the world, and we're not just going to give it away to our enemies because we have our pie in the sky somewhere else. That's why we're losing. Yep. That's a major factor for why we're losing. Nihilism, pessimism, all these things, which I think come from dispensationalism. I think it comes from premillennialism. I think it comes from, pietism. We've got to shift from that. So all that back to the physical training. The Bible, that's just one example, and there are others, but just one example. Paul doesn't say spiritual training is of infinite value and physical training is vain. Nope. Said the Bible never. Physical training, and Paul admits it is not comparable to spiritual training. It's not on the same level. It's not. But that doesn't mean that it has no value. And I'll be honest, that's hard for me. Because what I want to do is I want to pick the three things that matter most and do all of those things and nothing else. You know what I mean? Yeah. But that's not actually the way God constructed human life. There are actually a lot of things with triage, with varying degrees of value. And so it takes discernment and wisdom to live well in the world.
And some of those virtues enable other virtues. Like I
correct.
want to, by God's grace, live a long life, to be 80 years old and able still to see and to play with my great-grandchildren. I'm going to have to get into some off-the-beaten-path material just to try to understand how to order my diet, not take the exercise advice that's all out there that's common. Andrew Isker's book, The Boniface Option, is a great source of him saying like, hey, maybe fast food and the double XL fries baked in seed oil, these aren't good for you. You're told that they are, but they're not. And if you want to live a good long life, which I think is a noble aspiration, you're going to have to go off the beaten path and take a little bit of ownership for it too.
And the question is why? It's always
That's
why.
correct.
So I want to live a long life. Why? Because my treasure is here on earth and I have no hope for after I die. Okay, well, that's bad. But if it's like, no, I want to live a long, like I remember my dad telling me this, and I've heard other guys say it as well, but it was so encouraging. My dad, who has been a faithful father and a faithful husband for decades and decades, I remember him saying, Joel, one of my life goals is to outlive your mom. And the reason why is so that he could care for her as she's dying.
Wow,
that's good.
Okay, so the question is why? So if the why is, well, I want to live forever, and attain to transhumanism and upload my consciousness to, to Minecraft and walk around, whatever in the cloud,
Right.
well, then that's demonic. That's stupid. But if it's, no, I want to live a long time because I want to play with my great grandkids and be able to disciple them and invest in their life. Or I want to outlive my wife so that I care for her as she's dying instead of her caring for me. That's godly. That is piety.
Sounds like how Paul said, it's better for me to stay.
Right, for your sake.
For you.
And because of that, knowing that, I'm convinced that I will remain, at least for a while longer. So those are good things. Same with money. So like right now, we're talking about health. But think about that. So here's part of the problem. I'll just say it. John Piper. Love him. And he has helped me tremendously. I learned so much over the years from John Piper. But I do think that there's a certain point where you can attack the prosperity gospel and it's so extremely that you actually embrace a poverty gospel.
Right.
And so because what we've been talking about with the long life kind of thing and what food you eat and working out, physical training of some value, not no value, but some value, all that is in the health category. Right. Well, you only need two more categories to complete the prosperity gospel lie, which really is a lie: health, wealth, and healthy, wealthy, and wise. And like living for those things as the ultimate end. Is terrible. But wanting to be healthy is not inherently bad. And likewise, so if while we're at it, health and wealth, I think that's worth talking about as well. Like, are there actually pious motives, godly motives for wanting to attain financial wealth in this life? The answer is undoubtedly yes. Yes. And then power. Power is the same thing. Conservative. This is why we always lose. And Christians Christians make conservatives actually look good with this, sadly. But Christians actually think that the goal is, the wicked are the ones who are exercising power. They're the ones who are, doing this and doing that. And so what we're going to do is forsake power. Right. Theology of the cross. Yeah. I'm like, what? Like this, the theology of the cross, theology of suffering. It's like, yeah, that's part of the gospel story. Take up your cross and follow me. That's part of the story. But it's like they forget that, like, he was dead for 72 hours. That's it. And now he lives forevermore. I mean, Jesus was dead for 72 hours. Yeah. Then he took his life back up again. And not only that, but then was glorified and ascended to the right hand of God the Father Almighty, and said, even before his ascension, all authority on earth and in heaven has been given to me. So he forsook power and authority even unto death, even death on a cross, Philippians 2, right? Yep. The emptying of himself, not kenosis theology, but the emptying of himself, taking the form of a man and being willing to die, even death on a cross, a humiliating death, and all of that for approximately 72 hours. Yeah. And if we include, the humiliation of Christ and his earthly ministry and being mocked and those things leading up, his mock trial, then, okay, we could even say years. Okay, years, but then he rose from the grave, he took all power and authority back up and ascended to the right hand of the Father, and he's been doing that for 2,000 years.
And he did those things in order to gain that that position and that status and that
And
power.
Paul even says that who would suffer with him if not to reign with him?
Yeah.
Like that's part of it. And that reigning, sure. Like I can just hear the pietists watching, saying like, to reign, but not now, never here. Like you reign spiritually. Later, once you're dead, you reign in the 17th dimension where it doesn't matter. That's where you reign.
That will happen.
That will happen. And even then, it will actually matter. It won't be the 17th dimension. It'll be heaven come to earth. And, right. But we also reign now. Like you good biblical theology that keeps with Christian history, that's not just a post-war consensus that people came up with 15 minutes ago. That kind of theology, it's going to include Polycarp. And being eaten by lions or drawn and quartered, torn apart, beheaded, burned at the stake. It's going to the blood of the blood of the martyrs is the seedbed for the church. All that is true. If your theology does not include that, and even at some level rightly emphasize that, then you don't have biblical theology. Right. But your theology must also. So we're not saying this instead of that. As a substitute. We're saying this and that. Your theology must encompass a theology of suffering and the cross and the martyrs. You got to be able to do something with 2,000 years of church history and martyrs. You also need to be able to do something with Constantine and Charlemagne and Richard the Lionheart and Duke Gregory. And you got to be, all the other guys and defenders of the West. King Alfred. You got to be able to do something with that too.
Yep.
Besides just condemn it as an ignorant libtard that's never read anything about the Crusades and just says they're bad because someone told me they were bad, right? Which is what we kind of all do.
That's kind of a conspiracy.
We kind of all do that until you red pill and you start actually reading.
Well, think about
history.
40 years of public schools, like the Crusades were bad.
Yep.
And now that's just the zeitgeist. The Crusade. Well, we have Muslim extremism. We have Christian extremism too. And so really, same thing. We got to give up the power. If we overuse it, we could end up with the Crusades again. Well, hopefully, many aspects of it, like that would be a good thing to see Christianity established in Europe, in the West.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and part of it is the third wayism, where you make two fallible individuals or parties or whatever, you make them equally fallible. Right. When in reality, it's not that simple. It's actually much more complex. There are multiple variables. It's a multivariant, equation, and so like I remember. Tim Keller would do that with Democrats and Republicans. Jesus isn't on the right; he's not on the left. But that's true in a sense. I mean, Republicans suck. I say it like this. We have two parties. One is made up of sinister, wicked men, and the other one is made up of demons. So that's Republicans, wicked men, demons. They're not even human at this point. That's Democrats. And so but they're both bad. But notice in my little funny illustration there, they're not equally bad. Right. Wicked men are still an improvement from spawn of Satan. And so what Keller, he didn't say this, but what it did often, he wouldn't necessarily explicitly say it, but what it did is a lot of people picked up that rhetoric and they decided, well, Jesus isn't on the right or the left. But then what they implicitly took from that is that Jesus is equally distanced from the right as he is from the left, which means that both the right and the left are equally unbiblical, equally apart from the way of Jesus. You can do that with the Crusades, right? So and reading about the Crusades, some of the later Crusades especially, some of those, I think there actually were some sinful motives involved, and there was, ways where they really weren't keeping in with the standards of just war theory and those kind of, but a lot of them were. The
earlier ones especially.
The early ones especially, when it's like the main reason they're going in is not just to capture the Holy Land, but it's to go and save Christian women that are being raped, and so, and all their Christians that have been beheaded, and they're going to, to exonerate them. And so all that being said, there were sins on, because you're talking about people. So in both cases, Muslims and Christians, they're fallible. However, the problem is, one of the techniques is that people go and they'll say, well, both are fallible, and then implicitly, or sometimes just it's outright said, they're equally infallible.
Right.
No, the Muslims and Christians were not equally infallible. That's a joke.
Right.
Yep.
The Christians were fallible men, but many of them regenerate who love the Lord, and many of their leaders. And then the Muslims were terrible.
Their entire fortunes.
Yep. Literally gave it
as
up.
an act
By the
of
time they got to the war,
yes.
they had given it along the way to all these
Yep.
villages and all.
Yep.
It's insane. Richard the Lionheart, I'm convinced he, if what we do in this earth, does accumulate rewards in heaven, and one of those rewards is your seating distance from the throne, how close you get to be to Christ. Richard the Lionheart, I think, is going to be like front row seats, and so far that I'm going to have to bust out binoculars just to be able. Hey, Richard, because I'm going to be so far back. I'm here too. Me and you, we both did it.
We did it.
Yeah, you had the heart of a lion. I had the heart of kind of like a domestic house cat, but the same kind of feline family. So, anyways. All right. So anything else on principle 2, the things that affect your family? Because that was so good, Michael, to say, not just conspiracies in general, because there's a million of them. Yeah. So how do I narrow it down? Well, what stand the chance of being true? Because it's with powerful people that actually have an ulterior motive. That was number 1. And then number 2 is which conspiracy is affecting my wife, my kids?
Well, and that actually leads me to the part that's really going to get us in hot water here. But interestingly, the first conspiracy that I can find in the Bible, conspiracy theory, I should say, is when the serpent convinced Eve that the Godhead had conspired against her to keep her from wisdom.
Yeah,
and good. She fell to that false conspiracy theory.
Right.
And so the last thing that I wanted to say about this point is sometimes the conspiracies that hit closest to home, whether there's actual harm and you need to guard against it, or this is a deceitful conspiracy that we're falling into, sometimes our wives are going to be the most prone to fall into those conspiracies, the lies that are told them from the world. And so in the same way that husbands, we have an obligation to protect our wives and our families, we have an obligation to protect in this area as well, guarding them, keeping them in truth, instructing, listening to them. Yes, a woman's intuition is wonderful and inexplicable. And there was one time when my son had a tonsillectomy, and he was home, and just that afternoon, she said, we need to make sure we go to the store and get ice. Okay, go get some ice. She comes home. That night, his scabs split open, and he's bleeding all over the place. The way to deal with that is to put ice on the back of the neck. And before that afternoon, we didn't have any ice in the house, right? So there is a sense where a woman's intuition we should listen to and heed, especially if you're married. But we have an obligation as men, as husbands, to protect from lies and to help our families walk in truth.
Amen. All right, well, let's take a moment real quick, and then we'll pick up with the third principle, which is one of the easiest ways to tell a counterfeit is if you familiarize yourself with the real thing. So learning to think, using reason, using logic in a biblical way. But real quick, let's go ahead and hear from our last sponsor of the day.
Would you like to get control of your money and set up a system that will guarantee for the rest of your life tax-protected compounding interest and growth? How about having 24/7 electronic access to your money for funding wisely chosen investments, home improvements, and other large expenditures without going to the mainstream banks? This is not a dream, but it could actually be a reality when working with our sponsor, Private Family Banking. See their contact information in the show notes below. To make this season even brighter, Private Family Banking is giving away a pair of tickets, a $500 value, for the upcoming Blueprints for Christendom 2.0 conference, which is taking place on March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 2024 in Taylor, Texas. To enter the ticket giveaway, join their email list by sending an email to banking@privatefamilybanking.com. Again, that's banking@privatefamilybanking.com with the subject line of your email saying tickets. Then include your full name and mailing address in the body of the email. The ticket giveaway entry period will end at midnight Central Time on February 13th, 2024. And the winner will be notified via email on February 14th. You must be 18 years of age or older to enter, and only one email per person can be entered into this giveaway drawing.
All right, so here we are. We're going to go ahead and land the plane now with principle number 3. So if you've been with us this whole time, 3 tools for rightly judging conspiracies. The first one was don't be naive. Look at motives. Does a group of people, powerful people, or enough people, just a lot of people, stand something to gain? If they push this certain agenda, that might lend towards it, conspiracy being true. Number 2 was, you can give your whole life away looking into a million different conspiracies, but we do actually have as Christians an obligation, especially as men, to expose the deeds done in darkness and to protect our wives and children. So the second principle when judging conspiracies is, does this conspiracy hit home? Does it affect me, my wife, my children? And then the last one, the last tool for rightly judging conspiracies is that we need to learn how to think, familiarize ourselves with the authentic article, like a dollar bill, and then we'll be able to recognize the counterfeits. We need reason and logic. So.
I was really struck as I was reading some of this book by Isaac Watts, which is just called Logic. And he says in the introduction to his book, he says, logic or reasoning, the ability to think, is the cultivation of our reason by which we are better enabled to distinguish good from evil, as well as truth from falsehood. And both these are matters of the highest importance, whether we regard this life or the life to come. As it regulates our judgment and our reasoning, so it secures us from mistakes. Reasoning, logic keeps us from mistakes and gives us, this is startling to some of the pietists, it gives us a true and certain knowledge of things. And it furnishes us with a method so that it makes our knowledge of things both easy and regular. It guards our thoughts from confusion. And there was a way of ordering thought and life that emerged out of Christendom, which in and of itself was a safeguard in some ways against conspiracy, against false thinking, against error of action and of thought that we frankly have lost. And I think there's, to jump into conspiracies, you think of the way that the United States public education system has devolved under Dewey and progressive methodologies since then. And of course, it's designed to not teach us to think, to not teach us truth, to not teach us virtue, but to teach us to take what we're told and to have no ability to evaluate them or hold them up to the light and discern them, whether they be right or wrong.
Right. Part of what you're talking about right now is just being generalist. You cannot be an expert at everything. You can be an expert in one thing, maybe, if you're incredibly gifted and talented.
And for the record, we need those. We need Christians who are experts in vaccinology or in monetary policy or in all of these things. We do.
Because right now we don't have them.
Yep.
And I'm not saying there's not an individual Christian out there that is an expert in a particular medical field. What I'm saying is that all of our experts, at least overall, have discredited themselves. Right. We don't trust them anymore. So we've lost the media experts, we've lost medical experts, we've lost political experts. We've from the White House, from politicians to medicine to media to certainly academia. That would be another. At every single level, our institutions are, you would expect the premier leaders of institutions. That's where you'll find your experts. And all that is crumbling right now. And so we do need institutions. I don't think a society, especially as large as ours is, societies actually, because there's a temptation in me as a conservative biblical Christian to just, cheer on the destruction of our institutions because they're all so corrupt. So I'm glad that they're falling, and I really am. But there's a hubris, I think, if the Christian's not careful to say, yeah, good riddance, we don't need Harvard. No, we need a Harvard. Yeah. We need institutions. I'm grateful for Nate Fisher and Josh Attaboy and those guys that are like Abatoy, sorry, Attaboy. Those guys who are, building institutions like New Founding, they're working on, that's why we're, even with Right Response, it could just be a webcam and it's just Joel. You don't have to build a team. You don't have to invite other people on. You don't have to have a ministry name and actually have, I have a board with Right Response that holds us accountable. And you don't have to do all that. Why do that? Why not just, a phone is powerful enough. I can just put my phone up and record videos and drop them on Twitter. But what I'm trying to do is build an institution because we need institutions, and institutions traditionally carry a sense of trustworthiness, credibility, and that instinct is right. It's actually not good for society, the place that we currently rest, where institutions right now, when you hear the word institution, your first inclination is distrust. That's not a good thing. That's not winning. Exactly. That's massively problematic. But right now, though, I think, so yes, let's rebuild institutions, Christian, biblical institutions, but we also do need that your everyman, your everyday Christian does need to be a generalist. He may never be an expert in any field, but he should be able to be a generalist who generally knows logic, knows reason, knows how to think. And that does apply to something, just to bring it home to a practical example, something like COVID. I remember, people, and this was Christians, arguing with me like, well, you're not an expert. You're not an epidemiologist. And I remember saying, well, I don't have to be, because my argument isn't on the basis of epidemiology. My argument, and here's how I know it was right. Well, I've known I was right for 3 years, but if it wasn't apparent enough, it became very apparent when Francis Collins, who was supposed to be an expert and a Christian, just recently came out and said, "Whoopsies." So we missed a few things, and then he goes on to list. We were looking at like densely populated cities like New York. We weren't thinking about how this would affect a rural place. Everything that he says are things that I was saying in April of 2020. You know why? Because you don't have to be Francis Collins. You don't have to be an expert in a particular field to realize those things, because they're no-duh things. Yeah. We need some more no-duh Christians. Yeah. And I think that's what a generalist is. A generalist is able to just look at the we could be talking plagues, or wannabe plagues, or we could be talking politics, or we could be talking academic. But a generalist is able, he's just got a good BS detector. He's able to just, in general, say, that's dumb. That's dumb. Why? Well, why is it dumb? You're not an expert on this. Well, it's dumb for these very practical reasons.
People will be trained by some institution. It's not like, well, we can have these institutions or we could not. And people could be taught to think the wrong way, or they could be neutral, or we could do the hard work of teaching them. And C.S. Lewis, he does a great job in Abolition of Man, because he points out how modern textbooks, when they say, don't say the waterfall is beautiful, say, I simply perceive the waterfall is beautiful, you're dumbing man down. And then he says, when the propagandist comes, the hard heart, dulled to nature and to natural affections and to seeing beauty, and a soft head hasn't been trained in rigor, he says it's going to stand no chance. Yeah. You dumb man down, you abolish him, you create men without chests, and then the propagandist comes along, and he is ripe for the taking. He's going to take him right along. So someone's going to train people how to think. Right. They're going to come out, and they're going to reach 18 years old, and they'll be taught some way, somehow, from someone, how to think to a lesser degree. Why not be us? Why not be Christian parents, Christian schools, Christian churches that do that education?
Amen. Yep. Completely agree. Well, any final thoughts as we go ahead and land the plane?
Only thing I'll say is, hopefully I'm putting Nathan on the spot here, but maybe in show notes, if we do that, or in the YouTube, we did come up with some resources that might train in thinking better, because let's be honest, all of us are in a situation where even the best and brightest are not nearly the thinkers that the men of previous generations were. And so all of us need training. All of us need help in this area. Yes. And so we did I researched a couple of
read them
good.
Off, and then we'll see if we can put them in the description.
So a couple of books. The one that I just mentioned now, Logic, The Right Use of Reason in the Inquiry After Truth by Isaac Watts. Another one, it's not training on logic, but it is on understanding ideas. It's called The Consequences of Ideas, Understanding the Concepts That Shaped Our World by R.C. Sproul. And then there's a video series by Greg Bonson called Critical Thinking and Formal Logic. It's long. It's 19 episodes on YouTube. Awesome. So those are the three that I'll mention.
Awesome. Super helpful. And one last component. So, that, we're doing 3 shows a week, Lord willing, starting now. This is our first week of the new year, but that's the goal for 2024 and moving forward is Theology Applied 3 times a week with 3 different formats. Theology Applied, the interview on Monday. And that's kind of the, what you guys who've been following us have seen, where somebody remotely comes in. So that's on Monday at 4 p.m. Then Theology Applied, the live stream. And that's going to be every week with Michael and Wes, Lord willing. The 3 of us, that's a live stream, 4 p.m. on Wednesdays. And then Theology Applied, the special. And that's where I also have 2 guests, but guys, the special will be quarterly seasons. And so I've got Andrew Isker and A.D. Robles this Friday will be the first episode. And so that'll be quarter 1 for January, February, and March. And then I've got Brian Sauvé and Ben Garrett for Q2. And then I'm lining up guys, for Q3 and Q4. And the special is going to be, 8 to 12 episodes on one singular topic going deep. This Wednesday is going to be, one topic just for the week. And then we move on. In some cases, though, we may have something that's like, all right, this is going to be a 3-parter, or a 4-part. And we, a little bit of a deeper dive. But again, one of the strengths of the Wednesday live stream is it's not just the same 2 guys for 8 to 12 episodes, but Lord willing, it's us 3 guys for the course of this whole year. And Lord willing, we'll see what comes next year and continuing. And so building some rapport, building a relationship, practicing, getting better. This is our first one. So we'll get better for you guys who are watching, but getting better. And but then the live stream also, by it being a live stream, not pre-recorded, it allows us to hit big world news items. If something drops on Tuesday, or even Wednesday morning, we could hit it that afternoon. And so we can have fresh content by not pre-recording it. But then the last thing, I felt like I had to say this because we kept referencing it. So I think, just go ahead and show our hand here. This show, it's going to be live and therefore fresh, relevant. But it also, I think the advantage of this show is that it's going to have a lot of preparation, a unique amount of preparation in the sense that part of the reason why I got Michael and Wes is that they're both good speakers, but they're also both very knowledgeable and they're good writers. And so what I've asked them to do is that they're going to alternate each week, actually writing a 1,500-word article with citations and resources and quotes pulled and an outline, so that this Wednesday special, again 4 p.m. Central Time, the Wednesday live stream is arguably our most prepped show, our show with the most careful, meticulous preparation. We're not going to be flying by the seat of our pants. So these guys are writing a whole episode out for us, and we're not, just reading it from the script. It's a natural conversation, but a lot of research has been done, and so you guys you're gonna hear good, zippy one-liners that you've come to know and love from Joel Webbin, but you hopefully will also be hearing, lots of facts, Michael and Wes especially bringing that. So I'll say something that hopefully by God's grace is true, and it usually is. God's pretty gracious, but then they'll also be able to give a citation for that. And and further, to go even deeper with that, or more specificity, or so-and-so said. And so I think it'll be our most timely show because it's a live stream. We can hit events quick, but it'll also be one of our most prepared shows.
Wes, you want to tease the topic for next week?
Yeah.
Topic for next week, why power is not a bad thing. Why evangelicals shouldn't have an allergen, a aversion, a put your hands up. And I think one of the big reasons is because it gets you off the hook. If you're not powerful, well, nobody expects anything out of you. So tune in next week.
That's great. Cool. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Thanks.